Well, I was one of the things that we were sort of talking about, a bit of toxic jiu-jitsu culture.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw one time, and I'm not a fan of this, is it was the same sort of situation, right? We were at a training session, and one of the blue belts at an old gym that I worked out had managed to tap out one of the black belts. Caught him in like a foot lock, an ankle lock or something like that. Pretty rare for the blue belts to catch the black belts, but listen.
But it happens.
It happens. It happens to everybody.
It happens.
And, but this is, again, I was talking about some red flags in the last episode. This is one of those red flags where you got to be careful who you train with, because what happened was this blue belt caught him in a foot lock and then tapped him out. And right away, I see this coach's eyes. He just gets angry, super competitive.
Yeah, he wants to show us.
He wants to show what's up, right? And he got caught with like a foot lock from the single leg X, right? Yeah. So right away, the next match, they slap hands, they fist bump, they go back again. The instructor immediately pulls the 50-50 because he's like, "Oh, cool. You want to play foot locks? Let's play foot locks."
You want to play this game?
Blue belt catches him again. Same shit inside the 50-50 because this is one of his best moves. Right? And if you're not going to give respect where respect's due because that person's wearing a blue belt, even though maybe they have a brown belt or a black belt level move, one move, like an ankle lock or something that's really high level. Did the same thing, went in there, went ape shit. He's like, okay, you want to play that game? Boom, got ankle locked again. Second time, and like this happened in 1 minute, right? Tapped out twice by a blue belt. And then after that, I'm rolling at the side, right? And all I hear is, rah! And I'm like, fuck. I turn around and I look, and I thought he was like severely injured or something, right? And then he screams because he's pissed, gets out, leaves the gym, throws a fucking temper tantrum, right? Just gets out, leaves the gym, and then I'm looking around and I'm like, oh, what happened? And they're like, oh, he just tapped him out. And I'm in my head, I laugh because I'm like, dude, are you kidding? You're freaking out because you got tapped out by a student? And here's why it's toxic, right? Because first of all, if you tap out one of your coaches, you've trained for years to get to that point where you tap out one of your coaches. It's a moment, the first time you tap out a black belt, it's something you never forget, right? And to freak out over your ego because you get tapped out in that situation, and to rob your student of that moment because you're having a fucking fit because you lost is wrong. You're robbing your student who you've been training years of this beautiful moment where you get to tap out your coach.
You want to get him to
That's
that
what
level.
you're training him to do.
Yes,
And then to just steal that moment from him just so you can freak out and wallow in your own self-pity and your own ego.
That's gonna, scar that person that got him, It's gonna
it just makes you question, right? Like, what
just happened?
It almost makes that person feel guilty. It's like,
that's
dude,
what I'm saying.
What did I do? All I did was just try to do it. And then you see one of those things, and that's sort of the ego taking over a bit, right? Listen, man, I've had one time. I had this story. Shout out to Daniel if you're watching this podcast. I had this student called Daniel, and we were at the big trifecta over there. And I remember we were doing specific training, right? And I started on his back, and so it's a specific training. I started on his back or whatever, I started on his back, and then he did that thing where I had both my hooks in. He just dove on a toe hold from when I was on his back, right? He just reached, picked my ankle, rolled over, and started diving on a toe hold. We just went for it, right? And tapped me out. And then I remember we had this Japanese guy in the class called Katz. And the Japanese are they appeal to authority a lot. They respect the hierarchy and the higher belts and all that kind of shit. And he comes over to me and he goes, oh, it's okay, because he did a toe hold to me, and he's a blue belt, and you're not supposed to toe hold, but I don't give a fuck. I let my white belts heel hook each other, right? And he comes over and he kind of like making excuses for me, right? He comes over and he's like, oh, it's okay, he's not supposed to do that. And I'm like, no, man, don't take that away from him. He tapped me out. Don't. Good for him. Don't take it away from me. Like, just let him have that moment. He tapped the coach. Even though your ego gets a little bruised or something, guys, if you get tapped out by someone lower than you, congratulate them. And then if you want to turn it on and you want to bring the fucking heat, then bring the heat. But in that moment, give it to them. And then if you want to take it back,
take over, man.
If you want it to take over in the next roll, after you slap hands, fist bump, and then you want to fucking bring the thunder, go ahead. But in that moment, when you get caught, if it happens, just let your students have that moment. Don't rob it from them by just getting in your own ego.
Man. It happens to the best. It just